Good morning. 110 warships surrounding the first island chain. Missiles flying into the South Pacific. I mean, if you're monitoring your feeds this morning, you are probably seeing the internet screaming about World War III.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. But when you bypass that panic and actually analyze the raw intelligence, the data tells a vastly different story. So, welcome to this special deep dive. Today is July 14th, 2026. We are not here to, sell you on the ambient anxiety of the current Indo-Pacific standoff.
No, not at all.
We are here to apply the calm, objective, and rigorous methodology that global security demands.
Precisely. Because in an era where algorithms just amplify alarm, clarity is our most valuable asset. We really have to separate the actual indicators on the ground from all that noise in the air.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is brought to you by ProWave AI and generated by Stylo News. For context, Stylo News is the consumer version of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Right, the enterprise platform.
Exactly. A platform traditionally reserved strictly for enterprise operations, so we're talking government, military, and corporate entities.
Which is huge for the public to get their hands on.
It is. What that means for you, the listener, is that you now have unique access to the same AI-powered analytical tool designed to support the highest level global decision makers. It processes vast amounts of raw data into the actionable, unbiased intelligence that we're going to review today.
It basically allows us to track the signal through the static, which is desperately needed right now.
So let's look at that signal. Over the next several minutes, we're going to examine the intelligence reports and dispatches from the past 2 weeks regarding the region around China. We'll track the military movements, map out the strategic impacts, and evaluate the specific perspectives of the decision makers driving these events.
And we should probably tackle the most urgent question first.
Let's do it. You are seeing these headlines about fleets and fighter jets, and the natural conclusion that people jump to is that a massive kinetic attack on Taiwan is imminent. But I'm looking at the consolidated intelligence assessments from late June to mid-July, and the conclusion across the board is a definitive no.
A definitive no.
Right. A near-term amphibious assault is highly unlikely.
The public discourse is heavily skewed, obviously. But the logistical math of war does not lie. An invasion across 100 miles of open water, like the Taiwan Strait, is arguably the most complex military operation imaginable.
You just can't hide it.
Exactly. It absolutely cannot be hidden.
Right.
To execute it, you need to see classic, undeniable final warning indicators, and right now, we simply are not seeing them.
Yeah, the satellite imagery supports that completely. The Fujian coast, directly opposite Taiwan, it does not show the massive amphibious force assembly you would need for an initial wave.
No, it's pretty quiet in that regard.
And we are not seeing the broad, society-wide reserve mobilization within China that preceded historical conflicts of this scale, nor the mass logistics stockpiling at coastal embarkation points.
But the most vital indicator, the one analysts watch the closest, is commercial maritime traffic.
Because of the lift capacity, right?
Yes. A modern military cannot move a million-man invasion force, along with all their tanks, artillery, supply lines, just using specialized naval landing craft.
They don't have enough of them.
They simply don't. They require a massive fleet of civilian transport vessels. We're talking commercial RRO ferries, roll-off ferries, and cargo carriers.
And if we track those commercial ships right now, they are still running their normal civilian routes out of Shanghai and Xiamen.
Business as usual.
Right. If those civilian cargo vessels haven't been requisitioned by the military, Beijing simply doesn't have the lift capacity to launch a cross-strait invasion tomorrow.
Exactly. The invasion thesis just fails on the logistics alone.
So, knowing an invasion isn't happening tomorrow, how is Taipei processing this persistent threat?
Yeah.
Because they certainly aren't acting as if the danger is past.
No, definitely not.
I mean, I'm reviewing their recent acquisition strategies, and they are preparing to procure over 210,000 drones and autonomous vessels.
Which is a staggering number.
It really is. That isn't a force designed to project power. That is a force designed to make an enemy bleed for every single inch of water.
It is a textbook strategy of denial. Taiwan recognizes they cannot match their adversary ship for ship or fighter for fighter in a traditional symmetric war.
So they have to go asymmetric.
Right. Instead, they are adopting a long-term defensive posture aimed at attrition. By reviving anti-communist military training for domestic resilience and acquiring massive swarms of autonomous systems, they're attempting to make any potential crossing prohibitively costly.
I want to push back a little on the framing we often hear in the media. Commentators constantly compare this to a geopolitical chess match, suggesting the pieces are being moved into place for a final strike.
I hear that analogy constantly.
Right, but if you look at the deployments, nobody is actually calling check. I mean, are people mistaking a long-term setup for an immediate strike?
Well, I wouldn't even categorize it as a setup for a strike, honestly, because that implies a kinetic conflict is the inevitable conclusion.
Oh, I see.
What China is doing is deliberately preserving their decision space. They're increasing readiness, they're testing allied responses, and continuously moving assets. But they're meticulously calibrating their actions to stay just below the threshold of actual war.
Which brings us to the operational reality on the water. If they aren't invading, what exactly are these deployed assets doing?
That's the critical question.
Right, because over the past 2 weeks, the data shows a record 110-plus naval vessels operating along the first island chain. But I'm mapping the coordinates of these deployments, and the most alarming shift isn't actually happening in the Taiwan Strait.
No, it's not. The center of gravity is shifting east.
Yes, we are seeing a sustained, heavy presence of China Coast Guard and PLA patrols pushing out into the Pacific, specifically east of Taiwan and down near the Bashi Channel.
And that eastern shift is probably the most operationally significant development in the entire intelligence packet.
Why is that?
Well, you mentioned the Bashi Channel. That is a crucial deep water choke point between Taiwan and the Philippines. Submarines rely on it to break out from the coastal shallows into the deep open waters of the Pacific.
Okay, that makes sense.
So by heavily patrolling that specific channel and Taiwan's eastern coast, Beijing is fundamentally altering the coercive geometry of the region.
Because for decades, that eastern coast was considered Taiwan's safe haven, right?
Exactly. It faces the open Pacific.
It's where supplies, energy imports, and potential allied military support would logically arrive.
Right. By moving naval and Coast Guard forces to that eastern flank, they are contesting what was previously undisputed space. It severely complicates how the U.S. and allied forces plan any potential response or resupply effort.
That's a huge shift.
It is. Furthermore, analysts assess that this sustained presence is effectively a rehearsal for a de facto quarantine or blockade.
Okay, let's give the listener a visual here. Rather than kicking the door down, this strategy is more akin to standing on the porch, walking around the perimeter of the house and occasionally looking through the windows to test the locks.
That is a very apt analogy.
So what does this mean for the homeowner? What does this normalization do to Taiwan's everyday maneuverability?
It creates a profound psychological and operational strain. By maintaining a constant multi-axis presence around the entire island, Beijing conditions both Taipei and the international community to accept Chinese law enforcement and military assets operating in those waters as routine.
They just get used to it.
Exactly. Over time, the international community gets numb to it. That sets a new status quo, quietly eroding Taiwan's sovereignty and freedom of maneuver without firing a single shot.
But because Beijing is pushing east to complicate allied responses, the U.S. and its partners are actively demonstrating they will not be pushed out of the theater.
Right. They are pushing back hard.
This local pressure around Taiwan is triggering a massive multinational chain reaction across the entire Indo-Pacific.
It is a classic action-reaction cycle, and we are seeing severe strategic signaling on multiple fronts right now.
For example,
Well, on July 6, China successfully test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile, an SLBM, equipped with a dummy warhead, into the South Pacific.
I want to highlight the geography of that test because firing into the South Pacific isn't random.
No, it's highly intentional.
It bypasses the first island chain entirely. It is a very deliberate demonstration to the United States that China possesses a survivable second strike nuclear capability that can reach well beyond their immediate coastline.
It's a deterrent.
Right, it's a deterrent against U.S. intervention in Taiwan.
Precisely. And they are not acting alone. Concurrently, China and Russia initiated joint naval drills near Qingdao, heavily focused on joint reconnaissance and air defense.
Adding further complexity to the regional board, I see that North Korea launched a nuclear-capable cruise missile from its new destroyer, the Kankan.
Yeah, that happened right in the middle of all this.
And Pyongyang specifically timed that launch while publicly criticizing Japan's recent military expansion.
It's a coordinated alignment. It's designed to stretch U.S. and allied resources across multiple flashpoints simultaneously.
Which explains the massive flurry of counterbalancing actions we've documented over the last 14 days.
The pushback is substantial. I mean, the Philippines and the United States recently executed rapid, successive joint maritime patrols in the West Philippine Sea.
This was their fifth maritime cooperation activity, signaling a solidified alliance.
Exactly. Additionally, the U.S. and regional allies are currently running massive theater-wide military drills, including Resolute Dragon and their arm-pack naval exercises.
We also saw Australia and Fiji sign a new defense treaty. And, while Fiji might seem distant from the Taiwan Strait in the vast expanse of the Pacific, sea lines of communication are everything.
They are the lifeblood of any operation.
Securing logistical hubs in Oceania ensures Allied forces can actually sustain supply lines across the Pacific if a blockade ever materialized.
That is the overarching strategic picture. But to remain objective, we really must examine the specific perspectives of the decision-makers driving these deployments.
Okay, let's do that.
From Beijing's viewpoint, how are these missile tests and naval patrols internally justified?
Well, the intelligence clearly outlines that China views its maritime patrols and missile tests as legitimate defenses of its national sovereignty. From their perspective, these actions are a necessary and proportional response to perceived provocations.
And they classify it as a U.S.-led containment strategy, right?
Yes, a strategy meant to stifle their rightful rise in the Asia-Pacific.
Conversely, you have the perspective of nations like the Philippines. Defense Minister Teodoro recently issued strong public condemnations of China's posture in the South China Sea.
Manila's perspective is deeply rooted in international maritime law, specifically UNCLOS.
Right. Defense Minister Teodoro has made it clear they refuse to yield to pressure, viewing the presence of Chinese vessels in their exclusive economic zone as illegal infringements based on the 2016 arbitration ruling.
And zooming out a bit, Japan and the United States share a foundational perspective that increasing their defense postures and conducting exercises like RIMPAC are absolute prerequisites to maintaining freedom of navigation.
And upholding the current rule-based international order.
Right. So with all of these competing perspectives backing fully loaded warships operating in the exact same waters, I have to ask about the tangible danger to U.S. personnel in the region today.
Based on the data, the intelligence assesses the threat to U.S. forces as moderate and increasing.
Moderate and increasing, okay.
However, the critical distinction here is the source of that threat. The danger does not stem from a deliberate, planned first strike by the PLA.
So what is the danger?
The escalating danger arises purely from the risk of miscalculation.
Ah, I see. When you have hundreds of rival ships and fighter jets operating within hundreds of yards of each other, constantly testing engagement zones, the probability of an accidental collision or an unsafe maritime encounter spikes dramatically.
Exactly. A simple steering error could trigger a massive diplomatic crisis.
And what about the diplomatic footprint? The embassies.
The threat to U.S. embassies remains low to moderate. The primary risk to diplomatic personnel is not military action, but rather potential political protests.
Right. Coordinated demonstrations outside diplomatic compounds.
Yes, as these regional tensions inevitably spill over into civilian anger, similar to the protests we tracked recently at the Chinese embassy in Bangkok.
Now, while human actors maneuver to maximize their geopolitical advantage, natural forces have introduced a chaotic, completely indiscriminate variable into the theater.
Mother Nature does not care about geopolitics.
She doesn't. Meteorological agencies are tracking Typhoon Bavi. It formed near the Philippines and is currently carving a path toward the South China Sea and southern Taiwan, specifically threatening coastal areas like Iloanbi and Taitung.
It is a severe weather event bringing heavy rainfall, high temperatures, and localized flooding.
Beyond the immediate economic impact to local agriculture and fisheries, it introduces a concept military strategists call the fog of nature.
Right. Historically, severe weather has provided cover for military movements. Think of the Battle of the Bulge.
But in this instance, it places a massive dual strain on Taiwan's national infrastructure. The government in Taipei is now forced to balance high-level military vigilance against that encroaching naval presence we discussed, while simultaneously executing massive emergency disaster response protocols.
To protect their civilian population.
Exactly. It violently stresses their resources on two completely different fronts.
It is the ultimate stress test of a nation's resilience.
But I'm curious about the physical reality on the water. In the news business, we often see weather act as an indiscriminate referee. Does a massive typhoon essentially force a temporary physical cooling off period simply because small Coast Guard cutters and maritime militia vessels cannot safely operate in extreme sea states?
It absolutely disrupts military shaping activities in the short term. The physical limitations of naval architecture in a typhoon force a pause.
You just can't be out there.
No, it's too dangerous. But more importantly, it highlights a stark irony in the region, which is transboundary meteorological cooperation.
Oh, that's interesting.
Despite severe, borderline hostile diplomatic tensions, practical disaster risk reduction and weather data sharing remain a shared necessity for basic survival in the Indo-Pacific. The weather does not respect exclusive economic zones.
That's a very fair point. So we have established the physical reality on the water, the logistical constraints, and the weather. Now, I want to pivot to the digital reality, because how the global public is processing this information is radically divorced from the objective intelligence we just reviewed.
It's like two different worlds.
It is. If you parse the sentiment data on the X platform right now, the public discourse is intensely dominated by fear.
It is a stark contrast. Users are reacting with extreme alarm to the presence of the 110-plus warships and the SLBM tests. They're framing it almost uniformly as the opening salvos of World War III.
But you are seeing analysts and expert voices on X actively intervening, trying to correct the record and push back on these viral claims.
They are trying their best.
But they're meticulously pointing out that framing this as an imminent invasion threat or a literal encirclement is a profound exaggeration. They're trying to steer the public understanding toward the reality of gradual gray zone expansion rather than imminent kinetic war.
Right.
But, a calm 1960s-style objective review is exactly what is missing in modern social media. If the intelligence explicitly says no war today, why is the digital public so thoroughly convinced otherwise? Are people just misinterpreting the data?
They aren't misinterpreting the data at all. They are succumbing to the strategy.
What do you mean?
Psychological pressure is a foundational component of gray zone warfare. The panic you are seeing online is not a side effect. It is a metric of that pressure working successfully.
So the panic is the strategy.
Exactly. The ultimate strategic goal of these massive maneuvers is to win without fighting.
Right.
By projecting an aura of overwhelming power, inevitability, and constant crisis, the resulting public fear of escalation becomes a weapon in itself.
It forces a reaction.
Yes. It applies immense pressure on foreign capitals and, more importantly, on domestic populations to concede to political demands simply to avoid the imagined catastrophe.
Which brings us to our future watch. If we strip away the public panic and rely strictly on the intelligence data, what are the most likely courses of action that our listeners should watch for in the coming weeks?
Well, expect a continuation of normalized gray zone pressure. You will likely see further naval and Coast Guard patrols pushing specifically into Taiwan's eastern flank and the Bashi Channel as that normalization campaign persists.
And how will the U.S. respond?
In response, expect persistent, high-visibility regional military balancing by the U.S. and its partners. To reiterate the core finding of today's deep dive, there is no imminent war, but there is an elevated, ongoing, and very real risk of coercion.
To stay objectively informed as these events rapidly develop, remember that you have access to the same tools we use. Stylo News is available as both a mobile and computer application.
It's incredibly useful.
It is. It allows you to download and completely customize personal intelligence-style briefs drawn directly from hundreds of traditional news sources and X. It bypasses the algorithm's bias and gives you the facts. You can subscribe and get AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
In a landscape dominated by fear-mongering, an objective filter is an indispensable tool.
It really is. Now, before we conclude this briefing, we want to leave you with a final concept to mull over on your own. If Beijing's long-term strategy is a slow, methodical, Python-like preparation for a blockade designed meticulously to stay just below the threshold of open conflict, at what point does the preparation for a quarantine become functionally indistinguishable from the quarantine itself?
That's the million-dollar question.
And more importantly, how will global shipping and insurance markets react to that ambiguity when they have to price the risk of moving cargo through those waters?
That is the defining economic and strategic question of the gray zone strategy.
And with that, I'm going to drop the news anchor persona for a second. Truly, thank you for spending your time with us today. It is heavy, complicated material, and we really appreciate you trusting us to walk you through the mechanisms behind the headlines without all the usual panic and spin.
It's a complex world out there, but once you understand the why and the how behind the deployments, it becomes much easier to navigate.
Absolutely. Please feel free to request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms. Until next time, keep your eyes on the data, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.